Presley of ActOutGames.com and Pino Chichi. Hi. We're going to be doing a Presley's perspective.
Presley's perspective, that's right. And you don't remember what we're talking about today?
I do remember. We're talking about whatever problem's going on in Egypt.
We're talking about Egypt. And
I don't know.
Egypt specifically, but more generally we're talking about government. And different forms of government and types of government and what's happening with the government over in Egypt. You remember what you said the other day when I told you we were going to do a video about Egypt?
You didn't tell me.
What did you say?
I don't know what they're doing, but it's probably up to. But I don't know what they're doing, but they're probably up to no good.
That's right. You said, I don't know what they're doing over there, but they're probably up to no good. Which is pretty funny. Why would you think they're up to no good over in Egypt?
Because there's problems going on over there, so there's something going on.
Yeah, there are problems going on over there. So, and it's all government related. So, I thought, oh, hang on a second. Yeah, we'll deal with that. I'm just thinking that light's right behind us. In the hallway there. But we'll deal with it. Talk about government in general a little bit, right? The different types of government that exist in the world. And you can think about governments, I think, in two ways. So two things kind of define a government. One is who has power, so who rules, who's the ruler. And then the second would be how did that person get power? How did they come to power? And those can kind of mix and match. Different ways can come to power with different people in power and things like that. So you kind of mix and match those things and you get some idea of the different types of government that can exist in the world. Can you think of any type of government where you can tell me like how somebody comes to power or who gets to be the ruler?
I guess, I don't know if it's valid, but who should I use as an example? Who should I use as an example? Barack Obama.
Barack Obama, good.
He got elected for president, and that's how he got power.
That's exactly right. So Barack Obama, that's an excellent example. That's our form of government. So that would be called like a representative democracy. So the people voted, and that's how he got power, was people voted for him. And then he is a single person that's president, right? And then there are, like with the democracies like that where people vote, there's different variations of that where sometimes only certain people are allowed to vote or certain people are allowed to run for office, run for president, right? So, like not too long ago, like women couldn't vote. Like you wouldn't be allowed to vote. Only men could vote, right?
Well, I probably wouldn't be allowed to vote anyways because I'm a kid.
Well, you're a kid. Yeah, I mean when you got older, right? So at some point in time, women couldn't vote. We talked about like slavery and racism and segregation and all that before. So black people couldn't vote at one point in time. They couldn't run for office. Women couldn't run for office. So sometimes even though you vote and there's a democracy and you vote for who's going to be the president, sometimes there's limits around who can run. Sometimes you have to own land. Sometimes there's like meritocracies where you have to have like a degree or some qualifications to run for president, and then people vote for the president. So that's a representative democracy is what that would be called. That's a great example. Do you think of any other ways that people can be rulers?
Being a king or a queen or a princess?
That's excellent. Being a king or a queen. That's a great one. So that's
being born into the royal family.
That'd be part of the royal family. That's a monarchy, is what that's called. How do you get to be the king normally?
Well, you were either born into the royal family or married into the royal family, and you're in line for becoming the king or queen.
Right.
And then if the queen right in front of you or king right in front of you dies, then you are going to be the queen or king.
Right. So that so it passes by like bloodlines typically, right? So the king, and again, sometimes it's only boys, so only the king's son can become the next king. So the queen is really just the king's wife. The queen can't actually rule by herself. Sometimes she can. In England right now there's a queen, and her son is the prince who will be the king when she dies. And then he actually just had a son today.
Yes, he did.
In fact, just today, right? And so that little boy will be the king when he dies.
And he's a prince.
He's a prince too, yeah. So if everything goes according to plan, which things don't always go according to plan with kings and queens and who gets to be the next king and queen, but it's pretty orderly at this point, right? So this little kid, if he lives and everything works out, then he'll be the king someday in a long time after his daddy dies. So that's a monarchy, right? So, and this is an interesting one to kind of pay attention to, because you can have monarchs who become kings and queens by bloodlines, so who their kids are, and like you said, who's next in line to the throne. But this also leads to another way that somebody can come to power, which is another way that somebody can become a king.
Somebody can become a king
Yeah.
if they marry the queen.
No, if there's already a king in place.
Oh. They overthrow him?
They overthrow him. That's exactly right.
With an army!
Yeah. So this would be like, it's called a coup, right? So if you use force to overthrow a government, then it's called a coup. Usually you use the military. So like one person will have control over the military, and they will use the army to overthrow the existing government and make themselves the ruler, right? And so if they use the military, it's called a military coup. But you could also do it in other ways, and it could be a coup.
Army, like in Game of Thrones.
Like Game of Thrones is an excellent example of that. So there was the Mad King in Game of Thrones, and he was the king, and his son thought he was about to become the king, but then the Mad King was doing all these terrible things, and so Robert got together with Ned and a bunch of other people, and they waged war against the king, the Mad King, and they overthrew him, and even, in fact, killed him, and then Robert became the king. So he had a coup. That's how Robert became the king, but then once Robert was the king, it became a monarchy again, and Robert's son sort of became the king next, right? So it became bloodline again. So these things can like shift and change a little bit over time, and a lot of times coups are involved in that, because you could have, like I said, there's a monarchy and there's kings and sons and queens and whatever, but then somebody comes in and overthrows that government, but then they establish their own monarchy, and then it becomes kings and sons again. So it can kind of change back and forth that way. That's really good. Okay, so we got like representative democracy, like ours, we just talked about, where we elect. There's monarchy, there's coup, where people can come to, and a lot of times in a coup, what happens is the person that comes to power becomes a dictator. So that's kind of like a king, but it's more like the person doesn't have rights by birth. They took the rulership by power, and then usually they decide who the next ruler is going to be. They get to just kind of pick and say, okay, I think that the next ruler should be this person that I've trained. Sometimes it's their son, sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's the king before them that they overthrew son.
Yeah, that's right. It could be just about anybody, but that person gets to pick. And then the other thing that happens that's really interesting is when you have these dictators and kings and monarchs, then sometimes those people have absolute power, which means they can just do whatever they want. Whatever they say is the law. They can just make the law up as they go along. Other times there's like a constitution, or there's rules, and there's already laws in place, and the laws limit what the king can do. That's kind of how it is in England right now. The queen can't just change laws and do whatever she wants to do. It's a constitutional monarchy, so she can only do what the Constitution says that she can do. So kings and queens, even when you're a king or a queen or an emperor, the pharaohs, all of these different kinds of people, even then sometimes you don't have complete power. You can only do what the law allows you to do. And then there's one other, I think, that's really important. There's so many different variations of this stuff.
There is one thing that it adds a hint to your power if you're extinct.
Wait, what?
If you're an extinct species, people don't know what you look like, so people may think you're stronger or weaker than you actually are. So it's kind of a way to get power, kind of a way to get weaker. If you're extinct.
Yeah, but if you're extinct, you're probably dead. So that might work against you.
Yeah, I'll work against you, but still people leave.
Right. And then, so the other thing would be like a pure democracy. So a pure democracy would mean that, like, instead of us voting for the president, like Barack Obama, we just vote for laws. Whenever somebody wants to make a new rule or a new law, everybody just votes on it. You go to the polls, and you go to the school or whatever, and you vote whether it should be a law or not. And there is no president. Everybody just votes for everything that happens. And in that one, there's problems with, like, it's called majority rule, right? So if you have enough people, if the majority of people want one thing to happen, then they can just vote, and that's what's going to happen. And you can have minorities of people who never get their way, and who are always kind of mistreated by the majority. And if you do a pure democracy, then you can never do anything about that. One of the good things about a representative democracy is that you vote for people to go make the rules, and part of their job is to think about everybody's rights and not just the majority rights. So that's another important way for those things to happen. So, which of those sounds best to you? Which one do you think is the best type of government?
Well, the best way to be a government is really if people vote for you, if people actually like you, then you should be able to have good government if people actually like you.
Right.
But if people don't like you and you're just chosen by someone that and not everyone likes, and not a lot of people like you, then that's not a good way to get power.
Okay, so you like voting?
Yeah, voting. The thing that most people like gets to go higher. The thing that most people don't like gets to stay where it is.
So do you think it's better to vote for like a president and Congress and those people who then make all the rules, or do you think it would be better if we all just voted on what the rules were?
If we all just voted on what rules we would have, then a lot of people would probably not be angry that like one person was president, because they don't get to make, because they can, if they don't want, say they want slavery in America, then they can vote. Then they can not vote to keep up the slavery rule. They can vote for something else.
Right, vote against it if they wanted to. Right. So so you would rather have just a pure democracy where we all got to vote on whether things were going to happen or not. Right. That's good. So I mean, like I said, the interesting thing would be like certainly. Well, not certainly, but probably at a point in U.S. history, there was a time when most people thought slavery was okay. And so if it was just everybody voting for whether or not we would have slavery, then we would have slavery because enough people would vote and it would win. Whereas when you vote for presidents and Congress and stuff, then sometimes you get rulers that are moral people, and even though most of the people in the country want...
I think you should be able to vote for both. Because you can vote for a president, and the president can make the rules, but if you don't like a rule that the president made, you can vote against it.
So you can overturn like the president's rules if you want to. It's not a bad idea. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's what most people, the reason that most people don't think that that's a really great option is because of that. Because if you had enough people that wanted to do something bad, then they could vote for it and do it, and you don't have people trying to stop you. But if you had a president in Congress, you only had 400 people that wanted to do something bad, then you couldn't stop them now in our government. So I don't guess it makes too much difference. So let's talk about Egypt for a second. We started this whole thing about Egypt. I just wanted to kind of run something by you. So here's what happened in Egypt. For many years in Egypt, there was, I guess, a dictatorship. Right? So people took power by power. They used force to take power, and they were dictators. And so they got to kind of rule the country, and then they got to decide who was going to rule the country after them, although there were always fights and power struggles and things like that. So they didn't have democracy. And everybody wanted them to have democracy and thought it would be a good idea if they had democracy. So they finally had an election. And they decided they were going to be a democracy, and they were going to vote for a president. And they voted for a president, and that guy became president. And then after a year, people decided that they didn't like the president anymore. They didn't like what he was doing, and they thought that he was corrupt and he was making bad decisions. And so instead of waiting and voting him out of office or doing any of those things, the military came in and overthrew him. So it was a military coup. I guess people kind of seem to be arguing about that a little bit, but in reality, that was a military coup, and they overthrew a democratically elected government, which is kind of what the interesting thing is, right? We keep saying we want you to be a democracy, we want you to be a democracy. They became a democracy, they voted for a president, he became president, they didn't like him, and so they went in and the military kicked him out of office, and is trying to establish a new democracy and have new elections and stuff like that. But the thing is, like, a lot of people don't like Barack Obama, right? And I don't necessarily want the U.S. Army to go throw Obama out of office and have us have a new election and elect a new president, right? Even if it's like the minority of people that want him out of office and want to go fight for people, or even if it's a small majority that want him out of office, it seems like having a military coup and having people, just because they have tanks and planes, be able to decide that this person's not a good president, we're going to throw him out, seems like a bad idea in general to a lot of people. To me, probably to me, I don't know, I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but that's why there's a lot of controversy in Egypt, because there was a democracy and they voted for a president, but now they're using a coup to throw that president out and make a new democracy. So
You're not really doing it right.
What are your thoughts? You think they're doing it wrong? Democracy, you're doing it wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think about that? Even if he's doing a really bad job and he's really terrible, do you think it's wrong for the military to throw him out, or do you think that sometimes it would be okay?
Oh, it's okay if a lot of people don't like him and he's like throwing the whole country around like they do, and he doesn't care about them.
Mm-hmm.
So if that happens, then you can do a military coup. But if just a small majority of people, like say 40 people, don't like this one president, then you shouldn't go out and throw him up. But if 100 people that are normal citizens of the place don't like the president, then it'll start being okay. It'll start being more okay for you to do a military coup on the president.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes they have a process. Like here, we have impeachment, is what it's called. And so you can go. It's like a do-over on an election almost. So you can say, okay, we don't like Barack Obama, and so we want to vote again and see if he wins again or not. And maybe he'll win again, maybe he won't, maybe somebody else becomes president. I'm not sure what they had in Egypt, honestly. The camera keeps turning. Mm-hmm. Try not to shake the table, because when you shake the table, it's turning. Put your feet down. No, don't touch the table with your feet, please. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if they had something in Egypt where they could go in like the middle between elections and try and impeach the president and kick him out of office without a coup. But I mean, sometimes in a democracy there's a process for if you decide you want to kick somebody out, that this is how you're going to do it, rather than having a coup and doing it by force, because that's just kind of distasteful, I think. So you understand the impeachment? Like if you want to go vote again and do over, that sounds better than a military coup to you, or do you think it's still okay sometimes to do a coup?
It sounds better than a military coup, but if like almost all the citizens in the don't like them, then maybe you give them you don't kick them out of office, but you sort of, I guess, warn them that they're doing a bad job by doing a minor coup that doesn't really knock them out or anything. It just attacks them and lets them know that they're doing a bad job, and maybe they'll start doing a better job. If they don't, then they'll have an impeachment.
Yeah, so we have a process here in America called censure that's kind of like that. So it's a vote that Congress votes and censures the president, and it's basically exactly what you're saying. It's saying you're doing a bad job, and if you keep it up, we're going to impeach you. So it's a great idea, and there is actually something like that here. I don't know whether there's something like that in Egypt or not.
We don't live in Egypt.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that happens too, like I said, sometimes with an election, only certain people can run for office and certain people can vote, and so sometimes elections are kind of fixed that way. And sometimes people just cheat, right? And speaking of, there's another kind of government. There's one that I didn't mention that's a big enough one that it's probably worth mentioning. It's called a theocracy, and that means that like the church runs the government. And it could be like a Christian church or Muslim faith, or it could be anyone, any type of a religion.
I just thought you said Muslim faith. Not faith.
No, faith. Right. So there could be, the church actually picks, and a lot of times they still have a president, but the spiritual leader, the religious leader, gets to pick who runs for president. And a lot of times it's just one person. So you do go vote, but there's only one person on the ballot, so you just check that person's name, and that person becomes the president. So that's not a real election, right? That's not fair. And then sometimes people just cheat. So a lot of times, like, people go to the ballot box and they write names and they put the name on a little piece of paper and put it in the box. And then after everybody votes, they take that out and they count all of the votes and see who won. So sometimes people will just cheat and go and write their name on a bunch of pieces of paper, or get a bunch of people to, when people go vote, they take all of those votes and throw them away and replace them with all of one person got voted for, like everybody voted for the same person. So sometimes people cheat even when there's voting, and they make it look like it's a democracy, but really it's a dictatorship. It's they're in control of the election process.
That's why you need security cameras.
Security cameras, that's right. That's like a chain of custody. Security cameras would probably be a good idea in those cases. And so sometimes we do.
Then you can see who the people actually voted for.
Yeah.
And if they're replaced by other people you can throw those out and write the names of the actual people.
Get the right one back. Yeah, and we do like the United Nations do these like election supervisors or observers, and so they
So
send
you-
people to go watch how the elections
I think
work.
this is a good idea.
Okay, let's go.
So you vote, but instead there are people you give your vote to,
Mhm.
and they check who the person is, and they write it down on a notebook or something. They will write the person's name and who they voted for on it.
Uh-huh.
So they can. So if people get into the box somehow while the people are not working,
Mhm.
they have their notepad hidden somewhere so they can see who they actually voted for.
Yeah, so they have like a backup of who you voted for. So some of the electronic voting machines these days do exactly that, right? So you get a ticket that has who you voted for, and then there's multiple copies of who you voted for, so that if there's a discrepancy, you can go back and kind of see what happened. That's another great idea, and they're trying to do things like that to make it safer and less prone to cheating and people gaming the system and figuring out how to make the person they want to be president. Yeah. Okay. So I think those are the big forms of government. I think ours is pretty great. Representative democracy seems to be a good one, but of course that's what I grew up living in, and that's sometimes that shades your perception of what you like, just because it's the way you grew up and the way that you saw things. You look at it differently, but I think that it's actually a pretty good way to be. I like the idea of the people being represented. It certainly has its ups and downs, and our system's not perfect by
I
any
think
means.
the Catholic Church picking the one president is just really, really unfair. Just pick on these two people.
Well, like the Pope, you mean?
No, not for the president. Like, there's no one person you have to check.
Oh, yes, yeah,
That's
okay,
just-
yes.
no.
You're right. So if the religious leader has a ballot with one person on it, yes, that's very unfair. I agree. I think that's not a very fair process.
You just eat them.
And so that doesn't really count as a democracy in anybody's book. They act like it's a democracy, but it's really not.
Not.
And then sometimes too, I
It's
guess,
a forced.
one other thing that's again worth mentioning is that sometimes even in all of these different forms of government, like a monarchy or a dictatorship or a representative democracy or all these different things, sometimes it's more than one person. Like usually you think about it being one person, like a king or a queen or a president, but sometimes there's groups of people. So you elect 3 presidents, and they have to work together and decide what to do. Or there's a group of 10 people that work together, a council that kind of decide how to rule a government and what things to do. So it's not always just one person that gets picked as a leader. Sometimes it's a group of people that get picked. And then like our government, there's a bunch of different people, and they all do different jobs. Like there's the president that does a job, and the Congress does a job, and the courts do a job. We have these 3 systems that balance each other and can do different things. We'll do a whole checks and balances conversation some other time.
We'll do that next
balances.
perspective.
Balances of power, yeah, that's
Some later perspective.
that's detail about our system of government and not kind of what are systems of government like we're talking about here. So that's a good one. Yeah, Game of Thrones is a good example. And then the little kid that was born today of the monarchy, and then there's like the pharaohs were like that, and kings all throughout history.
And then presidents and blah.
Yeah, right.
A lot of stuff is good examples.
Yeah, emperors in
Emperors.
Japan was the same type of thing. Japan had emperors, and that's the monarchy, same kind of thing.
Anime, Japan.
So they had different names. They call them different things, but they're all monarchs basically. So I mean, a lot of historical systems were all monarchies. That's a very common historical form of government, but things are moving more towards democracy these days, which is a good thing. Anything else? Anything you want to add, or any other questions that you have?
I do not have anything else to say about it.
Okay.
So,
It all makes sense, though.
yeah, it all makes sense.
Yeah, and I thought maybe what we would do too, we could look at like some John Green videos or a couple of things, and maybe find a couple of really good form of government kind of videos and put them in the comments so that people could see a little bit more about different forms of government if they wanted to.
I have a new section.
What's that?
Last word of the day. There's a
Oh.
last sentence of the day
Okay.
where there's something I say. It's kind of like the secret phrase.
Uh-huh.
So if you like the video, you put it in the comment section. If you like the video and you've seen it.
Presley gets the last word.
Today's Today's, I guess, secret phrase is Egypt, democracy.
Democracy.
Democracy. You're doing it wrong.